Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Damage Per Podcast. I am your host, Jesse Bartell. I am absolutely thrilled to put out this episode today. I had the ability to talk to Jerry Oltion, and Jerry is just the most endearing, honest, just wonderful guy to talk to about books and science fiction. But I'm talking to Jerry today because he was one of the authors of the Unreal books that were published back in 1998. And Unreal was a very, very popular PC game. It spawned a whole engine that games would run off of. It spawned a sequel that wasn't so great, but it had a lot of multiplayer games that spawned after it. I played way too much Unreal Tournament when I was a kid. I think, I played that more than the first Unreal. But he was one of the authors of the media tie-in books that were made. There is a weird history with the books, including it just not really kind of being published correctly. Jerry and I talk about that. He is just a very bright, soft-spoken, warm person that I think I said, that I just think it's very cool. I think I say very cool about 100 times in this episode. I was just very giddy to talk to Jerry. And, Jerry is an accomplished science fiction writer. He's been published in Analog Magazine, which is a pretty prestigious, hard sci-fi publication. He's written Star Trek novels. He's written Unreal novel. He wrote the Shadow Warrior novels as well. And he writes a lot of nonfiction these days about astronomy. And that's his real passion these days is astronomy, and he's quite well versed in it. So this is just an episode I was really pumped to do. Jerry, I reached out to him to talk about the books and all that, and he was just so down and friendly about it, and I'm just overwhelmed, just kind of like, for me, as someone who is just doing this because they are like a fan of video games and video game books. It was just a absolute honor to have someone that was so accommodating and so quickly too. And so I'm really excited to share this episode with you. I did make one mistake. Shadow Warrior was not developed by Digital Extremes. It was done by 3D Realms. So I made that mistake. They were both published by GI Interactive. So there was some confusion in my brain, wires crossing. So they're in a publishing family of video games, but not a developed family of video games. Enjoy the episode. Jerry and I talk a lot about just science fiction, video games, writing, and I hope you enjoy it. All right. All right, Jerry. Thank you for being here, obviously.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So one thing I noticed about your bio, which I really, really loved, is that you have a background, like a large background of work experience as a oil field worker, a publisher, carpenter, gardener, astronomer.
Yeah, well, a lot of those are a little bit inflated, like the corporate secretary one. Well, okay, my astronomy club is actually a 501c3 corporation, so I was the secretary of my astronomy club.
That's pretty good. And it actually, I drew comparisons to, do you know who Dennis Lehane is?
That name doesn't ring a bell. I'm sorry.
So Dennis Lehane, he's a writer. He wrote like Mystic River, Gone Baby Gone, Shutter Island, that they all made into these movies.
Okay.
But he also he grew up in Boston, but he also had like this huge, resume of all these like sort of random jobs that he did, and one of them was like a sanitation worker.
Right. I did that.
Yes. I think it's really awesome because it gives you a lot of like world experience and really gives you insight on how like different processes work within the world.
That was my goal. I wanted to learn a lot of different things about a lot of different things.
And we definitely appreciate that. So one of the other things too about you, Jerry, that I think is really cool is that you've written like a bunch of short stories or that were published in Analog magazine, which I think is super cool.
Me too.
Yeah. And I think that that was like you were doing like really hard sci-fi, correct?
Yeah, pretty much. I've done a few soft ones, and I've written a little fantasy as well, but mostly hard SF. Yeah.
Which I think is really cool. And I just wanted to comment on that because Analog magazine, I mean, that's probably one of the more like serious science fiction publications. It's not like contemporary bookstore science fiction. It's like it's actual like science built into the work. And if you were to like remove the science, it more or less would probably fall apart essentially, right?
That's pretty much the standard for Analog. The science has to really be integral to the story.
Yeah, that's really, really cool to me. I just think that's really cool.
What's funny about this whole business with Analog is that I did not really think of myself as a hard SF writer. I was writing sort of soft science fiction, telepathy, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I wound up selling my first story to Analog, and so then I started sending them more stories, and they kept buying more stories, and so I kind of drifted into that Analog mode and into that fold. So it was not by intent. That's where I wound up. But I was happy to have that place for a home.
That's great. Did you have like was there anybody there that was like very like key to that development that you developed like a really great sort of professional relationship with, or was it just sort of like this like like blob of a publication that you just sent to?
The editor at the time was Stan Schmidt, and he was editor for 25 years or so of my career. And he became a very close friend. He and his wife and I and my wife, we travel together sometimes just for fun. Both of our wives are medical technologists, work in hospital laboratories too. So that was one of those odd little coincidences that just we really bonded. And Stan would not buy a story just because it was for me. He rejected plenty of stories for me. And you learn that there's a private life where you are friends, and there's a professional life where he's your editor. And we kept that separate, and it worked out very well. That's professionally and personally.
That's great. And let me think. You probably haven't. I mean, you kind of tapered off publishing a lot of stories for Analog, or submitting, I guess. I don't know how to put it, but but like a few years ago, you put out one, I think. So you're still like writing for you, and maybe we'll talk about this more later, but writing for you is like you have other things that distract you for your time now. And writing is sort of like you go back to that maybe when you feel super inspired, or
the thing is, I got into writing a lot of nonfiction because my hobby is amateur astronomy, and that got way out of hand to the point where I was building my own telescopes and things, and submitting articles to a magazine called Sky and Telescope magazine. And they published articles about several of my projects. And then the editor of that department, the telescope workshop department, retired, and they asked me if I would continue writing that column. So now I'm writing that column about other people's telescope stuff. And I've discovered I really love writing nonfiction.
That's great.
It's to me, nonfiction is like falling off a log. It's way easier than fiction, and it pays better. So I kind of cut back on the fiction. But yeah, a couple of years ago, I wrote a story about the DART mission to crash a probe into an asteroid, and sold it to Analog, and it won the Reader's Choice Award for the year. It was the most popular novella of the year.
That's incredible. Good job, Jerry.
I felt like, wow, I've still got it, No, so
can't take Jerry out of the game. No way.
Yeah. And I'm 66 now, so most people retire at that age, but I have no intention of doing that. I've slowed down the fiction a bit, but I've written 2 stories in the last month. One's going to go to Analog and one's going to go to FNSF. Whether or not they buy them, of course, I have no idea yet, but we'll see. And yeah, I'm still enjoying writing. So
great. That's good. That's good to hear. I wasn't sure what your necessarily like I just saw like through your publishing history, like I didn't know where you'd be at now, but that's really great. You sort of have this very like mature relationship with your writing now, where you like approach it.
Well, I
And
have the luxury. I have the luxury of a wife who has a good day job, so I don't have to produce writing. I can just write when I feel like it, and that's a gift. I tell you what, man, I am eternally grateful for that, and I make sure she knows it.
yeah, I gotta figure out your whole situation, Jerry, so I can.
Well, we periodically over the years have reevaluated it, and I will sit down and I'll ask her straight out, are you still happy with this arrangement? And she always has been. So I've never had to earn a ton of money. Although, if you want to segue into talking about these book tie-in or these game tie-in books I've done, the money for those was not too bad, I have to say.
Yeah, that's what I've heard, and I'm really curious. Okay, so what we're really here to talk about today, I get very excited and sidetracked with conversations about writing. So, but what we're really here to talk about today. So in 1998, the PC world was was shook when a game called Unreal came out, which was published by Digital Extremes. It was developed by Cliff Bleszinski was one of the directors, or he was the game director or story director. He's one of those. Anyway, Cliff Bleszinski is a big part of it, and Cliff is, of course, like he's one of those rock star game developers. It was the Quake killer, I guess. John Romero, John Carmack, like it shoved them under, and it was like Unreal came out, and it introduced a lot of new things to the first person shooter genre, and a big part of it was narrative and game telling, which in 1998 standards was pretty big. And the game is that you wake up on this prison ship, and you're like prisoner 889 or something like that, and then you can kind of go around and you find like these data pads with sort of like story stuff on it, like who the other people were and what happened. You leave the ship, you're on this giant world of Nepali, and there's these crazy big predator looking aliens called Scarge, I guess. Scarge. And there are the Nepali people who are enslaved by them, and sort of the game is like you running through these environments and eventually killing, I think, the hive mind, or the I forget what it was. I actually haven't played the game for over 10 years. Every once in a while I go back and I play it. But anyways, it came out in 1998. It was supposed to come out in 97. It got pushed, and it was a huge, crazy success. And it just came out like 6 months before Half-Life, which would go on. Half-Life would go on to like just completely change everything. But 98 was crazy for video games, is what I'm trying to say. Well, but anyway, what's that? Sorry?
It was funny that it came out in 98. It was supposed to come out in 97, and that's why my book came out in 97.
Yes,
they were supposed to come out simultaneously, and they did not.
so there's a lot of interesting publication things about this book, or these books, which is fascinating. So there were 2 books published in 97, correct? Were they published in 97?
I think let's see. Let me look at the publication date. I got it right here. But we wrote them in mid 97 to a very tight deadline. So actually it says first printing April of 98. So yeah, they must have come out in early 98.
Okay. So it was around, I guess it was around that time then. That's fine, I guess. Good. And so the books, which I read, and I thought they were really, I mean, you have to understand, like, game books, game lore now, like, is a whole business, right? Like,
I'm sure, yeah.
Books.
This was brand new back when we were doing it in 97.
Yeah, incredibly new. So you guys had like bare bones of like what the story was. So I kind of want to know. I'm saying a lot, but it's because I'm just excited. But what I want to know is, first of all, how did you stumble upon this gig? Now, I know you were doing you were working with some media tie-in stuff for like Star Trek, and you had done some other things. So I was curious how, like, I guess it was the pocketbooks connection.
Right.
But I was interested to, like, were you into video games and you saw this come up and you're like, cool? Or I know a lot of people who don't really play video games and they write video game books. So
that was me.
Yeah. So for me, I guess I'm really curious as to how you stumbled into this opportunity.
Okay. Well, the way it worked is that I was writing Star Trek books for John Ordover. He was the editor there at Pocket Books. And let's see, I'm looking up on my wall to see. I had written 2 of them already. I have the covers up on my wall. So I'd written 2 of them, of the Star Trek books. And a friend of mine named Dean Wesley Smith had also been writing Star Trek books. And John Ordover got the call from the developers of Unreal, and they said, hey, we'd like to have a couple of books out on our game, and we got this deadline coming up. And they had assumed that the game was going to be out in early '98. And so John Ordover knew that I could write quickly. One of my very first Star Trek book was written to fill a gap in the publishing slot that somebody else had failed to fill. They punted on their book, and John, I don't know how he got a hold of me and thought that I could write fast, because I didn't think I could write fast. But he offered me this book, and I decided, for the amount of money he's offering, yes, I'll write fast. And so I did. I delivered a Star Trek book that he really liked, and it was done pretty quickly. I think 2 months or so. Mm-hmm. And then I did another Star Trek book over a more reasonable amount of time. So anyway, the Unreal guys get a hold of Ordover and say, we need a book, or we'd like a book, but it needs to be done quickly. So John contacts Dean Smith and me, and he said, we need this book, or a couple of books, and we need them in 6 weeks. Like, what? Okay. Well, it doesn't have to be a 500-page tome, but it's got to be at least 300 pages or so. It's got to be a book, and this was before the internet. This was back when you'd stick a floppy disk in your drive and load up America Online and put your phone modem in a little cradle and listen to it go bing 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 as it's connected. And so we got together on America Online in a little chat room on AOL, and we spent an afternoon typing back and forth to each other our ideas for what we could do for this game. We had almost no idea what the game was about. I think the developers, after we agreed to do it and came up with a basic plot, they sent us what they had for a story Bible, but it was still evolving. So, we came up with an idea of doing a backstory before the Scourge had come to Nepali, and or I guess when they had come to Nepali. That was the backstory, and then the story of the first really serious resistance. Dean was going to write the early story, and I was going to write the later story. And gosh, I'm kind of blathering on here, but
it's great. It's totally great.
So the way it worked out, we had brainstormed an idea that John Ordover really loved, and that was that since we had a backstory and a front story, how about we shuffle the chapters? One story or one chapter would be the backstory, the next chapter would be the 400 years later, back and forth and back and forth. And so Dean and I were kind of careful to write equivalent chapters, and we would check in with each other as we were writing. And first you outline the book in like a 10-page outline or so, not a whole lot of work building the outline, but it would give the other guy kind of a general idea of where it was going. And it would give Ordover and the guys at the Unreal development game development department, it'd give them a sense of where we were going with this, and they could stop us if we were going in the wrong direction or what have you. Mm-hmm. So with the outlines in hand, Dean and I would write these. We set to work writing, and we were writing like a chapter a day. Just really buzzing through it. And I got to show you something. This might be a clip you want to show. I came up with LitX, Literary Express, for when it absolutely, positively has to be published tomorrow. That was my letterhead when we sent the book to John.
That's so cool.
So we finished them up and sent them off to John. And then, the way it works in the publishing industry is after you send the book in, they're done with you until they need something more from you. And usually it's proofs. And I honestly don't remember ever getting proofs. I think, we had to short circuit that part of the deal because it was so fast. Um, what I remember was getting a box of these books in the mail. And I'm all excited. And, we decided, at first we decided that they were going to shuffle the chapters, and then we decided that they weren't. And that, Dean's would be book 1 and mine would be book 2. And that was the last I'd heard, but, it'd been a week or two and I hadn't heard anything more. And then these books show up in the mail. And I open up the box, I'm all excited, and I'm looking at it, and I realize, well, book 1 is starting in the middle. And, this isn't good. And I pick up book 2, and sure enough, that's the beginning. And then I realize, the chapters are shuffled at least. But, book 1 only had my name, Ryan Hughes, my pseudonym, Ryan Hughes, and book 2 only had Dean's name on it. And yet the chapters were shuffled. And then I started kind of thumbing through, and it's like, oh, you know what? Some of these chapters are out of order. And, I actually phoned up John Ordover. It was before the internet. You didn't send an email. I phoned him up, and there was this long silence on his end as I was describing all the things that were wrong with the book. And John's like, you know what we're going to do about this? No, John, what are we going to do about this? Absolutely nothing. Because the game hasn't come out yet, and the game won't be out for months. And books, they have, every book has a shelf life, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before, something else takes its place on the rack in the bookstore. And, without the game to push the books, and, the books were there to help push the game, and it was supposed to be a synergy thing going. Sales were like in the dozens. We sold literally dozens of books. I think I still get royalty statements, and I think we're up to like 750 copies have sold now. Nice. I don't know where they're coming from now.
Once they hit 1,000, man, don't worry.
But yeah, John realized this book was just going to die anyway, so there was nothing you can do about it. So what Dean and I did is we printed little labels that we could stick on the books, and it says, read chapters 16 and 17 before chapters 14 and 15.
Yeah.
And this is book number 2, not book number 1. And we just stuck them on the books, and we'd go out and we'd sell them as the most screwed up book in publishing history. And people would buy it for that, but not for the story, which was sad because we worked really hard on it. And we really thought we did well with the stories. And I still think that. I reread it again in anticipation of this interview, and it's like, I did a good job, and so did Dean.
Yes. So here's the thing. So to anyone, let me just explain it exactly. But Unreal is coming out, right? And where they want to do media tie, and they wanted to do books because this is becoming more and more of a business, they wanted to hit wider demographics and everything.
They wanted to pull the science fiction readership into the game. That's what they wanted to do.
Yes. So they the books that Dean Wesley Smith and that Jerry worked on in 6 weeks were published into 2 volumes. And the first volume is titled, well, the book with number 1 on it is called Hard Crash, but that's technically book 2. Right. And then book 2 is called Prophet's Power, and that is technically book 1. And specifically in Hard Crash, that is actually book 2. There are 2 instances where chapters have been switched, that were switched in the printing situation, which is like, really crazy. Like, it's just crazy because I was reading it and I was like, well, let me see if I just read this. Like, if I were like somebody who didn't know what was going on, like it's very jarring.
Oh yeah. Well, there were, I can't remember who or where the review was, but somebody reviewed it and said, well, it's a mess. This book is a mess. And I went ahead and joined in and logged on, and I said, yeah, it sure is. And that's because, X, Y, and Z. And I gave him a roadmap of how to actually read the book. And to his credit, the reviewer went back and reread it, and he added to his review and said, once I had the roadmap, it was pretty good. But I have to add a thing. I found out from John what had happened to the book. They had a publishing assistant who, for one reason or another, was not working out, and so they fired him. But they didn't. They let him work out the rest of the day, and he was working on my book.
No.
Right, and so it's like he trashed it on purpose, as far as I can tell.
I wonder where that guy is today. Like, I wonder who that guy is and like what he thinks about that. And if like, I hope that he knows that he made some, like, a lot of people super sad.
Well, here's the deal though. If I ever meet up with that guy, I'm just going to sit down and have a beer with him. It's like, water under the bridge at this point. We'll have a good laugh about it and go on with our lives.
So, I have a couple of questions. So the book was printed out of order, just a real mess. It was just mass market, right? It just went into mass market. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one question I have is in the development. Did you get to talk to Cliff Bleszinski at all? Like, was he part of the conversation? Do you remember?
I don't remember that name, so I probably didn't. I talked to a couple of the developers. Names long gone now.
Yeah, sure.
And they sent me, like a story Bible, a very, very brief, like 5-page story Bible. And I think was it this one? No, it was the Shadow Warrior books. They sent me some audio clips. I don't think I got any audio clips from Unreal. They sent some screen clips. That's it. They sent some screen clips so I could get an idea what the Scarge looked like and what the Nepali looked like and that sort of thing. That's so cool. They were very responsive. They were gung ho about it,
So that's a really cool thing to mention about actually them being so responsive and helpful. So Epic, so Digital Extremes becomes Epic Games through a buyout process. It actually happened pretty soon after this time, right. And Epic Games went on to be the developers behind Gears of War. And Gears of War, Karen Travis wrote a bunch of books for Gears of War, and she said that she was given like a lore Bible for what they had, and the people were like, for the first book that she wrote for them, they were like, we want this one particular character to die and be at this location, and then you can kind of pretty much write in everything else that you want to write in. And she said they were fabulous to work with. So
right.
It seems that their history of working with media tie-in help was like really great, as opposed to something like maybe Star Wars, which is a little more Star Wars can be like a little more difficult to work with as a thing. And you actually wrote a short story, I think, for Star Wars back then was probably a little more easier to deal with than they are now. Like I
wrote a short story for their Cantina anthology, where we would each pick a character in the Cantina and tell their backstory. And I picked the guy wearing the spacesuit, and it's like nobody wears spacesuits in Star Wars anymore. Why is this guy wearing a spacesuit? And so I thought, well, I got to answer that question. And I don't honestly remember that I had to run that past continuity or anything like that.
Right.
I'm sure at some point in the process, somebody from Star Wars read through all the stories and made sure they didn't violate any of their core principles,
Yeah, George Lucas just looking at it, making
sure. I doubt if they got as far as Lucas, right? I think he had better things to do with his time. Star Trek, I've written for them, and you write your own outline. You tell them what you intend to write, and then they either okay it or not. And they don't tinker much. They either tell you, yeah, go for it, or now try something else. But they don't really dictate what you're going to do.
It's like, to me, that's like the most like fascinating part, because something like Star Trek, and then kind of like, well, Star Wars in like the 90s was a little more Wild West than it is now. But the Star Trek, that's I would say at that time, still, like at that time, it was definitely like super serious about its its world, I guess, or
Right.
not its world as a I mean like its universe, but like its world of people who are writing in it and doing stuff.
Hmm.
Because that was probably was Next Generation out at that point?
I think so by then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, the thing about the Star Trek books is they were not considered canon, and
Ah.
so you could do anything we wanted in the books, as long as the one rule is that you had to deliver the bridge crew intact at the end of the book. You couldn't kill off the bridge crew. But so of course I took that as a challenge, and then was it my second one for them? I killed off all the bridge crew, and just dropping like flies one after another through the book. And I wanted the editor. I did this just for John Ordover. I wanted him to go crazy, pulling his hair out because I'm killing off the bridge crew. And then of course I dropped them back at the end of the book, and I thought I did it in a pretty clever way. And they let me get away with that. They were totally happy with it because it's like it wasn't canon. And
Mhm.
Star Wars, I think they thought it was canon.
Mhm.
To tie it back into the Unreal, I think what we were writing was intended to be canon,
Mhm.
because we did have to stick to the basic idea. A spaceship full of prisoners crashes on the planet, and we followed the action of the game as much as we could. Um, but we got to invent so much stuff along the way.
Like that, there's that like shower that they take that they can like it fixes them.
Oh, right, right, right. My
Like
my
like
favorite my
like
favorite invention was the Scourge waste sucker, and then I thought, what if these aliens just have this really weird technological way to go to the bathroom? I was like, they were cool with it. They let me do that.
yeah, so yeah, back to the book. I get distracted very easily when I talk about
Me
this stuff.
too.
Um, so in the book is there's the first occupation and second occupation, right? So the chapters are told in you read the first occupation, they revolve, and
Right,
there's the first occupation takes place 400 years before the second occupation. And I think we covered
right.
that. But the first occupation depicts like the story of this Nepali alien who he's the one who sort of leads the resistance initially. He gets in touch with this AI
Hmm.
situation on this ship that like talks to him and kind of gives him these like doesn't give him like full like details of what's going to happen, but gives him like prophecies almost.
Right, exactly.
And essentially he's been told that there will be an avenging angel, blah blah blah, that'll come back and really defeat the Scar, because the first occupation really they're just dealing with like a handful of Scar that crashed there, and then in like 400 years the Scar had eventually decided to colonize the planet and enslave the people.
Right.
And this prison ship lands, and they become part, like the people who land become part of this resistance, and one of the characters is the avenging angel character.
Right.
And um and oh my god, oh, and I think what was really interesting about this particular planet is that like it has this weird like magnetic field, or I don't
Right.
know if it has a magnetic field or if it's like the teridium or whatever it is.
Teridium. Right.
Yeah,
The shtick was that the teridium had some kind of a radiation that would mess with communications,
got it.
and yeah. So once you were down, you were stuck. You couldn't radio out for help or what have you.
Mhm.
It was
And
just a convenient way to keep the outside universe at bay, basically.
yeah, no, super smart. And I also like that there's certain native characters to the planet who are like super sensitive to the Teridium,
Right.
and
Right.
like they have to be like almost like excommunicated from their villages because they're
Right.
like, and they have to go live out in the wilderness. And I thought that was an interesting touch because that's where you kind of start with the character. The Hot, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I guess it's Hot
I
or
think Dean called him Haute.
Haute. Okay, so
Haute. I don't really know. Yeah, but I think that was it.
so Haute is he's sensitive to this Teridium stuff, and it makes him kind of be out in the wilderness and then find this ship and like all this stuff. So
Right.
I thought that was a really cool touch. Um, for me as someone who really loves the game Unreal, like I remember because I grew up I was 10 years old when Unreal came out, and I remember like my first. I know Jerry's probably like, "What the fuck?"
I was what, 30 something.
You're probably about my age now. I'm like 35, so it's probably like around there. But um, but like I remember I'd go to the library with my mom, and I'd always look at the PC Gamer magazines, and man.
Right.
Oh, when Unreal was coming out, that was like every issue. It was just like, look at these crazy ass graphics and these characters, and the Scar is scary as shit. And
Yeah.
it was so cool. And you know, like for me, like I really at that age started reading books based around like science fiction and video games too. Had no idea that these Unreal books were even a thing. And, you know, my library probably couldn't get them, or, you know, even though, you know, whatever. But
Right. I can't
anyways,
imagine the library buying those books given the covers,
yeah.
actually. You know, maybe an adult library.
Yeah.
Which is the wrong audience.
Yeah, wrong audience possibly. But my mom was great though. She kind of would let me read anything. Like I used to sit up in the sci-fi section at the library, and I was reading like Timothy Zahn's Star Wars books and stuff.
Oh yeah.
That was a good time. So I guess I'm gonna move away from the plot of the book, but I wanted to ask you too, because I think we kind of touched on it for a second there. But like you and video games, is that even a relationship that you've ever had, or just not interesting to you?
You know, back in the mid '80s, I was working in a Computerland store when Macintosh first came out and the PC One, and then they came out with the PC Junior. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that they were trying to sell the PC Junior for was video games. And so they came out with King's Quest. And if I remember right, King's Quest was like the first game where you actually saw someone walking around on the screen. You know, all the previous stuff like Zork, you know, that was all text-based, right?
Yeah.
And Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that was the big game back then, right? Mm-hmm. But so PC Junior came out, and you know, the flagship program was King's Quest. And I was working at the store, and I convinced my boss that somebody in the store needed to be a virtuoso at King's Quest, you know, in order to show the right. So I got to take one of these things home, and I played with it and played with it and played with it, and I got pretty darn good at King's Quest, I have to say. And I could show people. You know, there were little Easter eggs in there, and I could show people where the Easter eggs were, and you know, give them hints of, you know, if they get really stuck, it's like, well, maybe you're in the wrong part of the castle, you know, try this other part of the castle, you might find something useful over there, you know. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, back in the day I was pretty good at video games, and enjoyed the heck out of it. And then I don't know, that was kind of the peak of my video game experience. Beyond that, I never really kept up. Mm-hmm. You know, when it got to be kind of first-person shooters, I think my interest had already kind of waned by the time it got to the first-person shooter game. So I never really played much of those. And you know, and then I was never good enough to compete with anybody at those, right? So none of the online multiple player games, you know, never did any of that. So yeah, it was a kind of an odd choice that they would ask me to write a book about a video game.
It's actually really not, and I bring it up not to like put you on the spot, because actually like I'll reference Karen Travis again, who does the Gears of War book. Like she doesn't play video games at all, you know, and she's probably, I think she's in her 60s now. Okay. But like, you know, people for some reason, like on the internet will be like, well, how can you write video game books if you've never played video games? And like, to me, I thought that's like such a silly thing, because like, if you were to read the books, you realize that that's not a requirement. Like understanding like the world and the fiction is a writer's job, and the interacting with that is the player's job, right?
Right.
So the player comes to it to enjoy what the writer has given them. You don't have to have you know, be a hardcore gamer so that you understand how to write a video game. Like it's all fiction, it's all lore, you know. So I just think it's a really, for me, like it's a question I like to ask, you know, more people who've done this type of work, like what their relationship is to video games, because sometimes they're just like, yeah, I don't even, it's like not even a thing, like it's not something I even do, which I think is kind of cool, you know, because as somebody who as somebody who does, I still play video games at 35, and I obviously I love video game novels and novelizations, almost maybe more than video games now at my age.
Right.
But for me, like it's just it's a cool thing to see, and usually back to talking about how you were sad about how like these books didn't get to the reader's hands, and how like you're happy that I was able to get my hands on some copies. And
Right.
you know uh Karen Travis, once again, when I was talking to her, was also upset that people, like, she just wanted the readers to have the thing, right? She wanted,
Right.
you just
Right.
want to give entertainment to the people who care about the final product or what the product ties into. So it's
Right.
like, it's such a bummer when you're like, you feel like you've hit like a roadblock with your work, that there are people out there wanting it, or that want to like ingest it, and then there's like no real way to get it to them.
Yeah, and I was really sad after Unreal came out, after the game came out and made a big splash and became a very popular game. I thought, here's this pair of books that could be republished in the correct order, and it could have been, a really neat thing. It wouldn't have been necessarily a gold mine for anybody, but it would have been just a neat thing for fans of the game to have. But
Mhm.
by the time the game became popular, the books were not even available anymore. I think they'd been remaindered and they were long gone. So there's this little gem that I wish that we could just put these up on Amazon for free or something.
Yeah, yeah. So one of my eventual goals with all this that I'm doing is
mm-hmm.
to like do something like that. And especially, like, I think the Unreal books are a great example, where if I could just get a hold of somebody and be like, you need to, republish this like in this order, this way, and
Right,
we don't have to actually print it, but like, what if we just did, just archived it digitally or something like that, so that it
right.
was available, like people could buy it for like $3 or something, but like, so that it was like a final product that, like, what somebody, sorry.
I think I still have the files in PC Write format. and I think before I gave up using floppy disks, I think I copied them onto a hard drive. So they're probably on some backup drive somewhere at this point. So yeah, we
So,
don't have to retype it all.
yeah, there you go. So like, my goal, I mean, like, if I could get, like, I'm trying to like reach out to a lot of people, and like, hopefully, like, if I get a hold of like Cliff Blazinski, and I'm like, hey, I don't know if he owns Unreal anymore, but if I'm just
Yeah.
like, yeah, I doubt he does, but like, to be able to be like, hey, do you think that this is something that we could work on and make it, like, all the assets are there. It's just really being like, more or less, poorly stated, but cock blocked by like publication issues, like just it's just sitting there
Right.
in an office somewhere.
Right. It's not
And
doing anybody any good. I don't even know, who owns the rights to it anymore. That's the thing. Is it a pocketbook right, or does the Unreal game company own the rights? I really don't
yeah,
know.
I don't know if like Epic Games owns it, or if Pocket Books just still holds
And
the
I
printing.
know from my perspective, I wrote it as work for hire, which means I don't own anything of
Ah,
it, So yeah, they paid me for the job of writing the book, and then the book was theirs. So yeah, so I won't be consulted if anybody does decide to publish it again.
I'll make don't worry. If I somehow end up being like leading the charge on this, Jerry, you will be part of this
I
conversation.
totally want to know about it, but I would be very happy to just have somebody else do all the work. Yeah, that would be
That'll be
great.
me. I'll do it. Don't worry. Uh,
Okay, sweet.
the other interesting part of this too. So we haven't. I mean, he's here in the room with us, but Dean Wesley Smith.
Yeah, right.
um. So what's your do you still talk to him? Is he still sort
Oh
of in your
yeah,
life? Yeah.
yeah. Dean and I are good friends. We had a little bit of a falling out for a while over a writing group that we were both part of, but
Mhm.
we've patched that up, and yeah, we're pretty good friends again.
That's great.
And
Uh.
Dean is still publishing a magazine called Pulp House that he started years and years and years ago. It went
Mhm.
on hiatus for many years and then started back up. And Dean has published one of my stories in nearly every issue. So yeah, pretty good friend will do that, right?
Yeah, definitely. And So his contribution. So he wrote the first occupation
Right.
part of the story. So
Right.
yeah. So the early
we brainstormed the two ideas together, and then we basically decided. Actually, we had done Shadow Warrior books previously, and if I remember right, I wrote the early story and he wrote the later story for Shadow Warrior, and so we switched. He did the early story for Hard Crash or for Unreal, and I did the later one. So it was just kind of almost a coin flip kind of a thing.
So the Shadow Warrior stuff, I actually am hoping that maybe in the future you and I could reconvene and talk about Shadow Warrior, because
I'd be happy to do that. Yeah,
that's
I've got
like
stories to tell.
yeah, that one. So Shadow Warrior was a PC game, to anyone who's listening, that came out before Unreal, and it was more in a tradition of like the style of like Quake or Doom, like in terms of like how the world looked, but it had like let's say more of a sense of humor to it.
It was far sillier, yeah.
Yeah, very silly, and like that game would definitely not come out today for a lot of reasons.
But main character's name was Lo Wang, for one thing. I don't think we could get away with that now.
Yeah, there's a lot of like what we would consider politically incorrect things in there. Right. But nevertheless, like Shadow Warrior was a big game, and it was also done by Digital Extremes, who did Unreal. So it was their game before Unreal. Yeah. I don't think Cliff Bleszinski was part of that. I forget. Was it Tim Sweeney? Maybe Sweeney. I forget. Anyway, I think he had a part in that. But the Shadow Warrior books, I do want to do a whole separate thing on, because
we met with a guy named Rick Ramo. Does he ring any bells?
No.
Yeah, he was the developer that we were talking with in the Shadow Warrior.
Oh, that's cool. I'll have to look him up after and see what he was part of. A lot of it's like, video game development is a lot like the book business, where like people stay in it till they die.
Right.
So they just kind of move around, like, sure. they move from different studios and stuff. I find that really interesting. So let me bring up my notes. So I have two sort of, one question I just want to know out of my own curiosity. Sure. Is that you worked on a different series called the Dark Sun trilogy, or Dark Sun series or something?
Yeah, it was Dark Sun. It was for TSR, for the Dungeons and Dragons series.
So a couple of questions. I noticed that Troy Denning wrote some of them too.
Okay, yeah.
Do you know Troy Denning? I was just curious.
No, never met. Never met.
So Troy Denning, who wrote some of those books for Dark Sun, ended up writing a bunch of not only Star Wars novels, but he wrote a lot of. There's this video game franchise called Halo, and he wrote.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, he wrote he's still writing Halo books now. Okay. And he's part.
The money must be pretty good.
The money's very good for Halo.
Yeah. So that was the thing, when these video game books, and actually, the Star Trek, Star Wars tie-in books, back in the 90s, media tie-in books were a big hot thing. Mm-hmm. And, if I were to write my own novel and try and sell it through Pocket Books, it might sell 2,000 or 3,000 copies. But if I wrote a Star Trek novel, it would sell 20,000 or 30,000 copies. Mm-hmm. 10 times as much sales, 10 times as much exposure. And so new writers especially were jumping on those right and left, because it got your name out there. And, Star Trek basically helped me buy my house. That was the down payment. So there was no real downside to that. We would think, oh gosh, people will think we're sellouts, but it's like everybody wanted to write for Star Trek. It's like, Greg Benford wanted to write for Star Trek. So I don't know. I'm not sure if Greg actually did. Greg, if you're listening, you have to straighten me out if that's not true. A lot of well-known writers did. And, and then it got into things like Unreal and Shadow Warrior and stuff. And when I saw the outline for, the story Bible for Shadow Warrior, it's like, oh, I totally went in, because it was a hoot. And
it's super silly, silly.
It is. And then Unreal, it's like, wow, the reason I wanted in on that was because it was so not me. I mean, I tend to write love stories, and I tend not to kill off characters. And, this was blood and mayhem wholesale. And I just thought, I think I want to see if I can do it. And, and do it in a way to where it's not just gruesome for the sake of being gruesome. But, I want to create an alien race that's really nasty and, and have reasons for it, not just because that's what they want to be. And so it was fun. I got to actually play in that kind of a universe. Um, and for me, it was a real experiment in seeing how far I could push myself into an alternate realm and see if I could actually become, for the duration of the writing of the novel, if I could become a character that was really not me. And it turned out, come to think of it, okay, I'm blathering on again, but it was that way with the Dark Sun book. My editor there asked, he said he wanted it to be a gladiator novel. I was like, I don't want to write a gladiator novel. I want to write a novel about the magic, right? The Dark Sun's all about magic. And I wanted to write a story about somebody learning how to use magic. And he said, well, you can do all these things. I just want it to be in a gladiator setting. So it's like, okay. I wrote about a guy learning to use his magic, and he was forced to fight as a gladiator. So, I kind of, I was pretty proud of it. It was my dark fantasy, my Thud and Blunder book, and I was very proud of that.
Yeah, I got to check that out because well, a couple of things. So you said it's part of like the D&D license. Is that correct?
The short story that the novel is based on, they had me do a short story first, and that came out with the box set. It was in the box set of the game for background.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, that's really cool. So do you play D&D, or did you used to play D&D?
Not very much. I've done a few rounds, but no, I wouldn't say I'm a gamer, even in D&D.
Yeah, it's well, that's interesting. So D&D for me, like I don't play D&D or even like the tabletop. Like I don't play it, but I have a lot of friends who do, and I really like watching them play. I just don't have like the time to like put like 6 months aside to meet up every 2 weeks to do these campaigns.
That's it. If you're gonna do a serious campaign, you put some time into that.
Yeah, exactly. So I really like admire and respect D&D, and I think it's, first of all, D&D is like the basic physical programming to what we understand as video games now, right? So
right,
like a lot of video game systems use the D&D systems to be implemented in terms of like character leveling and stat placements and all the things, conversations, damage per second, like all these things that we've come to know and love about like role-playing games as a video game really stemmed from D&D. So I think that shit is just like the coolest.
It is. It was kind of fun, doing the D&D stuff. People wonder, did I have a 12-sided die that I was rolling to see how my characters would survive or not? So I didn't do any of that. It's like, no, the story demanded that they survive at least to the end, right? And so, yeah, they have to survive. You don't get killed off and start over when you're writing a novel.
So, yeah, it wouldn't. Yeah, that'd be pretty tough if
yeah, right.
10 pages in you don't get a crit roll and whatever, you get like roll 2.
Right. So no, I wasn't rolling dice, but on the other hand, I did pay attention to how many hit points a person might have and how often I could have them survive an attack, and and what weapons they might need to survive against a particular assailant. And so I paid attention to the rules of the game, and I did it as honestly as I could. But I wasn't rolling dice to see whether or not they'd get out of a particular situation.
So a couple of things. One is that for me, like these Unreal books, this whole era to me is incredibly fascinating, right? So it's sort of like a too bad situation. You had this incredible video game come out that was delayed because of just development issues.
Right.
And you had this media tie-in that was just shy of being part of this. And I just feel like these books would have been a bigger thing and even have maintained like a cult status if they were properly distributed, like in a timely way. And like, even if they were published like out of order and all that stuff, I know that like somehow the internet, because internet forums were beginning at that time, like people would figure it out and it would become like a really cool secret thing, you know, and like I could just see it like as like this like really cool cult thing, and yet it was like a misfire.
Yeah.
And it's really, it makes me crazy.
It does. I did get fan mail, you know, every now and then I would get fan mail, and over the years I would get fan mail. It's, you know, people would find it in their dad's basement or something, you know. But you know, like I said, I think the sales figures were like 750 copies total sold, you know. So it's odd to think, you know, out there, you know, even if you get 5 fan letters, that's a pretty high return on 750 copies.
It's a good ratio, yeah.
And I do think that, yeah, the books they were well written. Both Dean and I really worked hard at it. There was no cynicism. There was no writing for the money. We were writing because we wanted to tell the story, you know.
Yeah, and like that feels like they feel very like the books feel genuine, or the stories feel genuine. Because, you know, yeah, you can be kind of cynical, and there are cases where people do media tie-ins and they're just like the most lazy things.
Yeah, you know, I've seen some of those
to be written, right?
Yeah.
But it like the Unreal books feel so like, even though they're kind of grim and violent, they feel so sort of like giddy and joyous about the material in a way that I found like just they're a breeze to read too, which I think is really fun. And they do just feel genuine, and it feels like both you and Dean had a lot of fun just making this. You know, it doesn't feel, yeah, it doesn't feel like it's you know, nobody had a gun to your head. I mean, you guys did write in 6 weeks, like it's kind of like a gun to your head, but like it doesn't feel like no one. It just feels like you guys really had a nice time and a fun time making this, and I think that is just very apparent, and I just love that about it, actually, myself.
And you know, the writing process, you'd think it was a grueling experience writing a book in 6 weeks, but it was not. In that, you know, we brainstormed the outline in just like a day, and then you just leap into it. And the thing about writing fast is it's so tight. You know, you don't forget what you did in chapter 1 when you're at chapter 30, because you wrote that 3 or 4 days ago. And you know, Dean and I were on the phone back and forth to each other all the time. And I think there must have been email back then. I guess
yeah, it was there had to have been
by way of AOL and putting your phone in the little couple, you know, acoustically coupled modem still. But yeah, so we would email each other back and forth, and but Dean and I spent a lot of time on the phone just talking about it. And you know, every time you'd come up with something really cool, you'd have to call the other guy up and say, "Look what I just did," you know, and we'd read a chunk to each other. And you know, I just have these memories of how much fun it was. And part of the fun was knowing that we were under that kind of time pressure, and knowing that both of us had the chops. We were going to do it. There was no doubt we were going to do it. So it just became, you know, it's kind of like when you're in the 7th inning and you know, you got 1 run to make in order to win the game. It's like, yeah, we're going to do this, you know, and the doing is going to be hard, and we have to really keep our stuff together here, but we're going to do it. You know? And that was the way we felt.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. I mean, it's a really interesting part of, like, it's just a really interesting part to me in video game history that is kind of, I don't want to say forgotten, because that kind of sounds like mean. Like, I don't mean it like that, but it's something that happened that I think a lot more people would appreciate if they knew it, like it was a thing. Like, and you know, there's really no like record of these books in too many places. Like, you can't find them anywhere. You can't. There isn't you know, a lot of coverage on it. Just sort of like you know, shouts and murmurs across the internet, but very little information. And
you would think, you know, this being the information age, that it would be available electronically. And
that's what I'm saying, man. I'm telling you, we gotta get it put together as a passion project, just so like
Well,
DRM
I've got
free.
my files, and I'm pretty sure Dean's still got his. And we have OCR if we really had to just scan a book,
Yeah.
so we can get this done.
Jerry, I'm telling you, I'm gonna work on it. I'm gonna try to make something happen.
Oh, I'm excited too.
Yeah,
this is great.
I really want to make it like a thing to happen. So it might take me a few years, but I really want to. It's like something that I feel like just has to like be part of this video game video game novel history. It's just, to me, it's just important. And
yeah. And the thing is, during the time that this was happening, there was a lot of media tie-in work, and it was starting to get kind of a bad rep because there were people in there that were just doing it for the money and they didn't really care. But there were a lot of people who were doing it because they loved the series, and this is why I was writing Star Trek. And I didn't know enough about Unreal to have an opinion about it, but I liked what I saw. And I turned down several media tie-in offers. I turned down a book about a submarine that needed to be ghostwritten for a famous submarine writer. Yeah, right, that book. I did not ghostwrite that book. So.
Wait. What book? What book?
Well, okay, The Hunt for Red October came out, right? And I did not. No, that was not the one that was offered. There was another famous book that came out not long after The Hunt for Red October that was almost as good, and it was almost the same story, which is why I didn't write it. But yeah, it did quite well. I'd be living in a bigger house if I had gone ahead and done that. But I didn't
what's a bigger house, Jerry? I mean, really.
That's it. It would still be full of stuff. So, full is full. It doesn't matter. But no, I turned down. What was the other one? Lost in Space, the novelization of the movie.
Oh, interesting. Well, that movie was not very good. So
it was terrible, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And
my mom took me to see that in the theaters.
Yeah, it was an awful movie.
That movie, I thought it was bad then.
Yeah, and they wanted me to novelize it, and I said, "Can I fix the science mistakes?" And it's like, "No, we got to write it. You got to write what happened in the movie." And it's like, no thanks. You can't write something that you don't care about. If you do, it's going to be a pile of poo. So you just don't do that.
Where do you stand now? Like, are you still a Trekkie, or is that not really a big
Absolutely.
thing? Yeah.
But I'm like original Trek. Trek classic. That's my Trek.
That's your Trek. Do you watch like the new shows at all just to see what's going on, or you're not really into it?
I can't remember which season I stopped at. I don't remember the last couple of franchises I have not paid any attention to. Picard, I think, is one of them, and the one that came out before that.
I think Discovery or something was the one before
Discovery, maybe that was it. But yeah, I'd watch the first episode or two, and it's like, nah, it looks to me like they're just milking the cow some more, and so I wasn't really into it. On the other hand, that could be a totally bogus impression because I know there are a lot of people who really like these new ones, and so I'm not going to denigrate something that somebody likes.
No, it's a different audience for sure. Like for me, like Next Generation, I love Next Generation. That's where I'm like good at, and I haven't watched Picard, which I should, I guess, because everyone says it's pretty good if you like Next Generation. So
right.
But like when I was growing up in like the 90s, like it was Picard for me, and then like my dad would show me the old TV show and the movies, and it was like that was like his Star Trek.
Right.
But I really liked, like, I would, when I would sit home at night and watch TV, it was Buffy, it was The Next Generation, and it was X-Files.
Right.
It was perfect.
Yep. Yeah, you had everything for you there.
Yeah.
With me, it was the original Star Trek. Watching it on a black and white television set with your hand on the antenna to get better reception. And, it was one of like 3 science fiction shows that you could get at the time. So I grew up on that kind of stuff. And to me, the opportunity to write Star Trek, it was a shock. I had never thought that it was even possible. I thought you had to know somebody in order to do that. and I think I got it because I did the Dark Sun book by then, and I did a couple of books in the Isaac Asimov Robot City series.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of proved that I was able to write inside someone else's universe without breaking it. And I think that's what got me the offer to do the Star Trek book.
It's interesting too that you said previously that like people get these like chances to do like Star Trek and like the audience for their work just like skyrockets from
right.
And so I pay attention a lot to that stuff more in a contemporary sense, like especially like the Star Wars books, that are now they'll have somebody that you'll see, they'll do 2 or 3 books, and then all of a sudden like a year or 2 later they come out with their own novel,
right?
And it does really, like, I think Chuck Wendig is a good example. He did 3 Star Wars novels for when the new movie was coming out, of the first trilogy, the first movie of the new trilogy was coming out.
Right.
And then he ended up, now he has his own, he doesn't touch Star Wars anymore. So
yeah.
like so he was able to do that. And it's interesting, that I'm sure the reach of Star Wars media books is just, I mean, it reaches me, but I'm sure it reaches like the.
Oh yeah. Well, with the Star Trek stuff, typically 20 or 30,000 copies would be sold.
Mm-hmm.
And I started my very first novel was my own, set in my own universe, and it sold reasonably well, like 3,000 copies or so for a first run paperback. But then, right after that, I did the Dark Sun. Let's see, I'm looking at I did the Robots and Aliens books next, and then I did the Dark Sun, and then I did some Star Trek, and then the Unreal and Shadow Warrior, and I did all these media tie-ins, and I started realizing, I'm building up an audience here. And so I tried another one of my own novels. And let's see, I'm looking up here. What would that have been? It would have been Abandoned in Place, which came out in hardcover and sold a couple thousand copies in hardcover, which is pretty surprising.
That's great.
And, and then they did a trade paperback. And, so I had a pretty good readership built up by the time my own novels started coming out. And, I think if I tried to just keep pushing my own novels to begin with, I might very well have not gotten as far as I did.
Yeah, I mean, for you, so like, once you like, this is like this is how I'll sort of like segue into sort of the ending of our conversation. But like you did,
okay.
You did like these media tie-ins, and then you kind of went back into your work. And I mean, yeah, I guess, what am I trying to ask exactly? Is like,
I bet the question is, why did I stop doing media tie-ins? Is that the question?
I guess more or less why. I guess that's part of it. I guess, yeah.
Well, I did have one more Star Trek book that I wanted to do, and that was because John Ordover he commented that I'd written a couple, like three books by then, in which Kirk had not gotten lucky. And he said, that's kind of out of character. So I wrote an outline for a book called Kirk Gets Lucky. And it was, and what it was, of course, he was cursed by an alien who could actually manipulate reality to actually have luck. It wasn't like, sexual at all. He was cursed with luck. But the problem is, it was actually a curse in that, it's unlucky to go into battle, right? So every time the Enterprise would gear up to go defend some planet, it would break down because, it's unlucky to go into battle. I thought it was a brilliant outline, because Kirk, of course, has to try and track down this alien and get them to remove the curse. Is what has to happen. And of course, he's being transported into the into the bedroom of the Pulchritudian captain, and all. He does kind of get lucky in that regard. So Ordover thought it was the perfect blend, and he thought it was great. And we sent that off to the continuity person at Paramount Pictures, and you could hear the explosion from Oregon. It was the fastest and loudest no I've ever heard.
Oh no!
So that kind of dampened my flame for a little bit. And but the real reason is that I just started writing my own novels, and I got to the point where that was what I wanted to do more. And I don't know. It wasn't that I just didn't want to write the tie-in books. You know what? Come to think of it, another thing that was going on. the Star Trek books in particular, they had peaked and were coming down the other side. They were not selling as well. Um, they'd overdone it. They were publishing too many of them, and I kind of felt like, well, I'm in a financial situation now where I really don't need the money, and I needed to be making an income, but I was writing my own books and selling those, and so I thought, well, all right, I can make it on my own. I'll let some of these other people who just got into Star Trek continue to write the Star Trek books, and so I kind of that was one reason why I thought, well, I don't need to be writing any more of those. And nobody ever offered another game tie-in book, so the Unreal was the last one of those.
Oh, I know. It's it's probably just like,
oh, wait a minute.
What's up?
Oh, I'm looking up at the wall and realizing, no, I did one called Vor, the rescue. Right. Anybody ever heard of Vor?
No, what is that?
It was a video game.
Wait, how do you spell that?
VOR. And video game in which the Earth falls into a black hole that leads into an alternate universe, and all these worlds are kind of careening around in the same solar system, and there's all the warfare going on between the various people.
Oh.
Yeah, I was contracted to write a book in that series, and oh gosh, what's his name? Bob Sheckley was contracted to write one. I don't know if you've ever read any Bob Sheckley, but he's a very, very iconoclastic writer. He has his own style, and it's way out there. And I tried to write a very straightforward, Unreal style book set in the Vor universe. And Bob Sheckley, he wrote something that was even farther out than Philip K. Dick would have written.
Damn.
So they rejected his book entirely. Which I want to read. I want to read Bob Sheckley's War book. I mean, that's one of the things, man, in an alternate universe, I want to go get that book. But they edited mine so heavily, I even pulled my pseudonym off it. And
yeah, so that's the one thing I didn't actually ask you about is your pseudonym. Was that like a contractual thing, or just?
No, I could have used any name. I used a pseudonym. Let me make sure I'm right on this. Yeah, I used the pseudonym for the Dungeons and Dragons book, for the Dark Sun book, because I wasn't sure. This is totally different than the sort of stuff I usually do. It's high fantasy, Thud and Blunder, and I thought, I don't know that I want a hard SF writer's name on that book in case, in case the book takes off, then suddenly I'm now a Thud and Blunder writer, so I put my pseudonym. I made up the name Ryan Hughes, and I thought, okay, with the other game tie-in books, let's make them Ryan Hughes books. And so Ryan Hughes will have a career as a game tie-in writer, and Jerry Oltion will have a career as a hard SF writer. It worked out okay. I don't know that the pseudonym was really necessary.
It's cool. It's interesting. Like it makes it a lot more mysterious. Like and who is this Ryan Hughes guy? Kind of thing. Yeah. Which is my initial research was trying to find out who Ryan Hughes was.
I got to tell you a story. Friend of a friend. Here in town, I was with some friends of mine. We stopped by one of their friends' place after dinner or something. And I don't remember how it all came around, but he got to talking about this book he was reading that he really loved. It was by this Ryan Hughes guy. I thought he was yanking my chain. I thought he knew, but he didn't. He didn't know that Ryan Hughes was me. It was delightful to say, "Well, dude, I can sign your book."
Yeah, you want me to sign your book, bud?
That's happened 3 times to me, that sort of thing. I was in a restaurant one time and somebody was sitting at a table kind of back to back with me, and I could hear him chuckling and turning pages and chuckling. And I was like, okay, I got to see what you're reading. And he was reading one of my books. And on an airplane one time, somebody had my book. So it's like,
That's really cool, man. That's like such a good feeling.
You feel like a success when that happens.
Yeah, that's great. So Jerry, these days, first of all, do you want to plug anything, like what you're working on, where people can find your work or anything like that? You want anything you want to plug?
at this point, right now I don't have anything in the pipeline coming out. So it'd be, my previous stuff. I started putting things up on Amazon, so you can search for me on Amazon and get some of my short stories, selling them for $1 a piece. That project, it's a daunting project. I've got like 150 short stories, and I think I got about 25, 30 of them done. And then the guy who was helping me do it kind of bailed out, and I'm not really a technophile, so doing all that layout work and then actually publishing it on Amazon, that's, to me, that's the hard part. Going on the internet and clicking the buttons that I need to click in order to get the thing published, that's the hard part. Go figure. But I'm kind of a Luddite in that response, or in that respect, So some of my earliest work is available on Amazon, but the rest of it, sadly, most of it's out of print. I think one novel can still be gotten from Wheatland Press, and that would be the one called Paradise Past. Yeah, which is an early novel. It's actually some of my early work, but it took a long time to get that one published because it was kind of a touchy subject. And,
why is it touchy?
It was religion on board a starship.
Okay, so yeah, that could be touchy.
Yeah, Starship gets where it's going, and we find what certainly appears to be Eden, and so the religion gets a big boost, but we're going to be the snake if we land. So the question becomes: do we mess up this civilization that's just getting started, or do we go on?
That's pretty cool. I like that idea.
I did too. I wrote a whole novel about it.
Yeah, I know. But as like that's a great concept. I don't know, like that's really cool to me.
Yeah. But I think that's the only one of my novels that you can get without going to a used bookstore or what have you.
Yeah.
So yeah, nothing to plug other than that stuff.
And you spend your nights really just doing. A lot of astronomy stuff for you. Is that right?
I'm an amateur astronomer. Love to go out just and look at the stars, and I do write a column for Sky and Telescope magazine now. And I guess I do write the science column every other month for the magazine of fantasy and science fiction.
See?
So yeah, that's where you can find my current stuff. Science fiction readers can go to FNSF, and I've got a science column in there every month. And I gotta say, I am insanely proud of that, in that this is the column that Isaac Asimov started back in 1958. And
that's pretty remarkable.
Oh man, to have the chance to write that same column, I tell you what, it feels like I've made it.
Yeah, no, that's a huge honor.
yeah, and I try very hard to make sure that I live up to it.
And do you still have your cat Stormy?
I do. She made the little run through here a moment ago, but she's gone off. Yeah. She's now, 18. She's an old kitty.
She's 18 years old. God damn.
Yeah, she's still making it, man. So
good job, Stormy.
Yeah. She only weighs about 8 pounds, but she's as frisky as ever.
Aw, good kitty cat.
Yeah.
Well, Jerry, I had a really great time talking to you. This was
I've enjoyed it too. This has been fun.
This is super fun. Don't go anywhere though. When I say we're leaving, I'm saying we're leaving to the audience, because I gotta ask.
Fair enough.
I want to talk to you about a few other things. But this has been like such an honor for me, like as someone who really values video games and video game writing, and just on an intellectual level. Like for me, this is like to be able to sit and talk with you about this. It's just like is the coolest thing. Like I've been psyched about this for months.
Me too. Actually, to have someone show some interest in something I did so long ago really, it makes me feel good too. I got to say.
Oh, good, Jerry. Yeah, no, it's really like it's just genuine, just feeling of like I'm really doing something, and it's just very rewarding, and
yeah.
and it's I'm just glad that you could be part of this, and I hope to talk to you again. But I just wanted to say thank you so much, and thank you to thank you to the people who listened, and we'll be back at some point. So
I hope to be.
All right, that is our episode with Jerry Oltion. Thank you so much for listening. You can find, my Substack, jessebartel.substack.com. On the interwebs, damage per second. Just Google that. You'll find it somewhere. Find my Instagram, damage per second. You'll find, I link you all the things. I'll give you the things. Jerry, you can find him at jerryoltion.com. And you can, find where you can buy his ebooks. You can see what he's up to these days. He has a nice little webpage that's very well done with plenty of information. You can see how prolific Jerry is with his writing, and how hard and he's worked and just wrote his ass off for a long time. And I'm just happy he figured it out. He's happy with the way he lives his life, and I'm just so happy I got to talk to him, and I'm gonna be talking to him again. So I'm excited to boot it back up and check in with Jerry again. So yeah, that is our episode. Thank you so much.